Good morning. Welcome back to the biology class. Today we are going to learn a new lesson, respiration in plants. Before getting into this lesson, I just want you to think about my two different questions. You have to think about the answer for my question. Okay? My first question is, why do we breathe? Right? Why do we breathe? Think about it. Why do we breathe? What do we take in at the time of breathing? What happens to that gas when it goes into our body? Go think up to cellular level. My second question is, what happens to the food that we consume? When it enters into our body, what happens to the food? Thinking about these two questions? Yes, ultimately, these two will end up in a process called respiration. Okay, even though we are learning about respiration in plants, as we all know about what is happening in our body, as we can assume what is happening in our body, let me go with respiration in a common term. And the processes involved is also common. Okay, so let me go into as a common process. We are talking about respiration in organisms. First, we need to talk about respiration in organisms. And then I'll talk about respiration in plants in detail. Okay, so first, my first question, why do we breathe? We breathe in oxygen, right? We breathe in oxygen, we take in oxygen. And what happens to the oxygen when it enters into the lungs? From the lungs, through the circulatory system, it will be supplied to the cells. Each and every cells will be supplied with oxygen, and this oxygen is utilized for the production of energy. Right? Yeah, put a full stop. The oxygen we breathe in is utilized to release energy at each and every cell. Okay, there comes a question, from where this energy is released? Now you have to move to the next question, second question. What is my second question? What happens to the food that we consume? When we consume food, this food goes into the esophagus, into the stomach. And remember when it enters into the small intestine, when it passes through the villi, this food is being assimilated into our body with the help of circulatory system. And the circulatory system will absorb all the food nutrient in the form of glucose, amino acid or fatty acids. Yes, and then this assimilated food will be supplied to each and every cell. This glucose is supplied to each and every cell. Now, the first question, from where the energy is being released? Energy is being released from glucose, right? Got that? So first I asked you two questions. Now, you can understand that these two questions are taking you into a common process, right? We can club that together. While we breathe in, the oxygen goes in, and this will be breaking down the food matter or oxidizing the food matter to release energy in the form of ATP, right? That is what respiration. Clear? Right. We can get into the class. We can get into the lesson. So to know more about respiration, first we should know what is respiration. How can we define respiration? Respiration is the breakdown or oxidation of food. I'm not saying that it's only oxidation, because there are some organisms which respire without oxygen too. We will learn about that in future classes. Okay, first for a basic definition, we should know what is respiration. Respiration is breakdown of food or oxidation of food to release energy. So what is this? This is a chemical reaction which involves in the respiration process. This is the basic symbol for glucose, the food. And the glucose is oxidized. So for one molecule of glucose, 6 molecules of oxygen is necessary to burn it completely, to oxidize it completely, to break down that completely, which will be releasing 6 molecules of carbon dioxide, 6 molecules of water and energy, a huge amount of energy. Okay? And this respiration is a metabolic process. This is an organism process. This is a process which occurs in organisms. And this is a metabolic process. What is this metabolism? We know this word from your 3rd standard or from your 4th standard. You are learning about metabolism. Metabolism. What is metabolism? Metabolism is actually including 2 different processes. They are anabolic process and catabolic process. Anabolic process. Anabolic process means constructive or biosynthetic process. Biosynthetic process. That means it has to synthesize something as a product. If anything is being produced by the end of a process, by the end of a chemical reaction which occurs in organisms, that process is called anabolic process. So anabolic process is actually a constructive process which will be leading to the production of something, some important components. So this is an organism's synthetic process. That can be anything, that can be energy. Here you can see that energy is produced, right? So that is a constructive process. That is an anabolic process. Now the next thing is catabolic process. What is a catabolic process? A catabolism or catabolic process means something which is destructive. So a destructive process or a breakdown process is called catabolic process. Now you can think about the reactant here, that is glucose. Glucose is being broken down. So here comes the catabolic phase of metabolism. So metabolism includes something which will be broken down to produce something useful, right? So all the biological processes, almost all the biological processes are metabolic processes because it includes both anabolism and catabolism, right? So that is what respiration is. Now we are going to learn about the respiration characteristics. So in characteristics of respiration, we need to talk about 3 major characteristics of respiration. The first thing we are going to talk is about the phases of aerobic respiration. So phases means the stages, right? So stages of aerobic respiration. Why I am stressing on aerobic respiration? These are the steps which we could notice in respiration which occurs in presence of oxygen. So phases of aerobic respiration includes 4 major steps. The first step is glycolysis. So glycolysis is nothing but breakdown of glucose. Breakdown of glucose, it doesn't occur in one single step. Glycolysis is actually includes more than 10 different kind of reactions. So all these reactions includes as one common process. By the end of it, one glucose molecule will be broken down into 2 molecules of pyruvic acid or pyruvate. You can know the spelling here. So glycolysis is breakdown of glucose, and which is the first step of respiration. Glycolysis generally occurs in the cell's cytoplasm. So glycolysis, as I said now, this is a huge process. This is a very long process which includes so many reactions and so much of enzymes to catalyze these reactions. The product of glycolysis is pyruvic acid or pyruvate. Now the second step of aerobic respiration is oxidative carboxylation of pyruvic acid. So here the pyruvic acid is oxidation and decarboxylation occurs here, and by the end of this oxidative carboxylation of pyruvic acid, it will be producing acetyl coenzyme A. Acetyl coenzyme A is the product of the second step of aerobic respiration. Acetyl coenzyme A. Now the third step, that is Krebs cycle. This acetyl-CoA, the product of this previous step, will enter into mitochondria to carry on the third step of respiration, that is Krebs cycle. Krebs cycle is otherwise known as tricarboxylic acid cycle. Tricarboxylic acid cycle, TCA cycle. This Krebs cycle is the one which will be releasing all the energy producing components. So this Krebs cycle is a very important one which occurs inside mitochondria. And this is exclusively a process which occurs in aerobic organisms. Glycolysis is not like that. This is a process which occurs in almost all organisms, which includes aerobic and anaerobic. Glycolysis occurs in cell cytoplasm, which is a common process. This process occurs in both aerobic and anaerobic organisms. So this is a very common process. The Krebs cycle is an exclusively aerobic process because it doesn't occur in anaerobes, and this occurs only inside mitochondria. So you can understand that this occurs only in higher organisms because mitochondria is an organelle which found in eukaryotic organisms. Got it clear? Now, the third process is Krebs cycle, which will be releasing all the energy components in the form of NADH2, FADH2 and NADPH2. Now, the fourth phase is electron transport chain. Electron transport chain is a series of components which are found in the membrane of organelle, which will be allowing the product of this step, Krebs cycle, like NADPH2, NADH2, FADH2. All these compounds, energy-rich compounds, will pass on through this electron transport chain molecules to release ATP. Okay, so this is a kind of energy-producing machine which is composed of so many subcomponents. For example, like ATM machine is there, in which we will be introducing the card. So you can compare NADH2 or FADH2 as a card, as a debit card. This can be compared with an ATM machine. When you insert the debit card into an ATM machine, after giving some signals, like after giving your PIN number, you'll be getting the cash. The same way, electron transport chain is a sequence of chemical components through which these molecules, the product molecules of Krebs cycle, will pass through to release energy. So these are the phases of aerobic respiration, and all these things are biological process. So each and every reaction requires enzymes, and all these things are enzymatic reactions. Okay, and the next characteristic is, so the second characteristic is all these reactions. As just now we discussed, glycolysis, oxidative decarboxylation of pyruvic acid, Krebs cycle, or electron transport chain or system. All these reactions are enzymatically catalyzed. There is a specific enzyme to catalyze this reaction. There is a specific enzyme. Each and every reaction is catalyzed by a specific enzyme. For example, like if it is a dehydrogenation process, dehydrogenase enzyme would be there. If it is an enzyme which will be producing an isomer, isomerase enzyme would be there. So specific enzymes are there to catalyze all the above said reactions. And then the third character is this energy is released in the form of ATP by the end of respiration, because ATP is the only available, only easily acceptable source of energy by the cells. And a little bit amount of heat will also be produced, but there is no release of light energy by the process of this respiration. Okay, only heat energy is produced and ATP is produced. So the characteristics, what are the major three characteristics? The first one, respiration is including a series of chemical reactions as like glycolysis, oxidative carboxylation of pyruvic acid, Krebs cycle, and electron transport chain. And all these reactions are enzymatically catalyzed. and energy is released in the form of ATP and heat. Right? Now we need to know about the important terms. What are the things we have discussed earlier? Right? Now it's time for the important terms. And we need to know what are the terms I said about. So first, ATP. ATP is energy compound adenosine triphosphate that you have studied already. And the second compound is NADPH2, which is the product of Krebs cycle. NADPH2, that's nothing but nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide phosphate. Nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide phosphate. And FADH2 is flavin adenine dinucleotide reduced. This hydrogen H2 will make the compound reduced, which is the energy rich compound. So nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide phosphate reduced, flavin adenine dinucleotide reduced, nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide reduced. These are the products of Krebs cycle, which will be at last used to produce ATP when they enter through the fourth phase, that is electron transport chain. Clear? Now, the next topic what we are going to learn is how does respiration is different from burning. Respiration is also oxidation of food. Burning can also be oxidation process. But what is the difference? Right? So these are the thing that talks about respiration. Respiration is a series of chemical steps. We know that. And in respiration, enzymes are involved. That also we know. And it's a biochemical process. It's a biological process and it's a chemical process. It ends up in the release of ATP and heat. And there is no production of light energy. And this is a cellular process which occurs in the cell. And it occurs at body temperature. Imagine what would happen when the body temperature or the temperature in an organism is raised. For example, the same kind of respiration occurs in a plant or animal, for example like a fish. If you transfer these organisms into a higher temperature, or if we are subjected into a desert, if we are going into a desert, we used to sweat more. And you have heard that when a person is if a person is abandoned in a desert, the person will die. What is the reason? One major reason is the body temperature will go abruptly wrong. So what would happen if our body temperature doesn't suit well with atmospheric temperature? If we are going into a desert without any precautionary emergency step, what would happen? The outside temperature will drastically kill our each and every cell, and you know that all the reactions occurs inside the body is enzymatic. They need an enzyme, and enzymes are very specific at their temperature, working temperature. When temperature is going beyond a level or when temperature is going below the level, the enzymes will not be working. The enzymes may undergo denaturation process, or it will undergo a process called degeneration. Like enzymes will go freeze or will get killed because of the higher temperature. That's why respiration occurs only at body temperature. When the body temperature level is so different, enzymes will go dead. Okay. Now we are going to know about burning. Burning is not a series of reactions, it's just a single step. And it's carried out by heat, ignition temperature, right? And it's a physical chemical process. It's a physical and chemical process. And heat is released in the form of heat energy and light energy. There is no ATP production. There is no ATP production. It's not an anabolic one, it's purely catabolic process. And light is produced, yes, we know that, and it's not a cellular process and which occurs at a very high temperature. We call that as ignition temperature. Okay, so these are the difference between respiration and burning. Clear? Now it's time for your homework. So in today's class, I taught you about what is respiration, what are the characteristics, what are the phases of respiration, and I taught you some important terms to learn too. And you should know the difference between respiration and burning. So in your text, you have to read all these things, which is just one page. So please read it and make sure you're taking note of it. So that's it about the class today. Thank you, kids. Stay safe and stay at home. Thank you. Meet you in the next class. Bye.